7 clear signs you're walking God's way, not your own. You've been showing up, praying, staying in the Word, trying to walk in obedience even when it costs you. And still something feels off. It's not that you're doubting God. You know He's real, you know He's good. But this season is heavy, uncertain, unsettling. You're doing everything you can to stay faithful, yet it feels like nothing is moving forward. In fact, it feels like things are falling apart. The relationships you counted on are shifting. The doors you thought were open are slamming shut. The peace you were promised is being replaced by silence. And somewhere in the middle of it all, you find yourself whispering, "God, did I miss you? Am I even on the right path?" But here's what most people don't realize until they've been walking with God for a while. His path rarely looks like what we imagined. It's not always comfortable. It's not always clear. And more often than not, it takes us through seasons we never asked for. But if you're in that place today, wrestling with uncertainty, questioning your direction, second-guessing your obedience, I want to speak directly to you, because what you're feeling might not be failure. It might be confirmation. What feels like resistance might actually be refinement. And what looks like loss could be the first sign that you're not on your own path anymore. You're finally on God's. Let's talk. Part 1. You're facing more resistance than ever before. You thought that saying yes to God would finally bring peace. That once you stepped out in faith, things would start falling into place. You believed that following His will meant favor would surround you. Doors would open easily, and life would feel lighter. And yet here you are walking in obedience, and everything feels like it's falling apart. The truth is, the moment you began to take God seriously was the moment you became a threat to everything that once held you back. You're praying more than you ever have, and yet you feel spiritually attacked like never before. You're pursuing purity, and temptation seems stronger than ever. You're chasing God's calling, and everything familiar is being shaken. It doesn't make sense at first, because the world taught us that difficulty means something is wrong. But in the kingdom of God, it's often the opposite. Resistance is often the greatest evidence that you're walking in the right direction. Think about it. When you were living for yourself, going with the flow, compromising without conviction, you didn't feel this kind of pressure. Why? Because the enemy doesn't fight what doesn't threaten him. But the moment you shifted, when you stopped coasting and started surrendering, the battle began. That's not failure. That's confirmation. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." Spiritual wickedness in high places. Spiritual warfare isn't a myth, it's real. And it intensifies the moment your life starts aligning with God's purpose. So no, the hardship you're facing isn't random. It's not proof that God left you. It's the spiritual consequence of walking in obedience in a broken world. God never said His path would be easy. He said it would be narrow. He said it would cost something. But He also promised it would lead to life. So if the attacks have intensified, if the voices of doubt have grown louder, if the weight feels unbearable, don't assume you're off track. Consider that you may be more in His will than you've ever been. Because the enemy doesn't waste energy on people who pose no threat. The pressure you feel is not always a sign to turn back. Sometimes it's a sign to press in deeper. You're not being punished. You're being refined. And sometimes, resistance is not a wall. It's a doorway. Keep walking. Part 2. You're losing people who used to be close. This one hurts in a way you didn't expect. You thought stepping into God's purpose would bring clarity, not confusion. You thought the people who loved you before would cheer you on. But instead, the moment you started to truly follow where God was leading you, something changed. People started pulling away. Friends went silent. Family began to question your choices. People who used to support you now look at you like you've lost your way. And deep down, it stings. You're not trying to become someone else. You're just trying to obey God. But your obedience is making others uncomfortable. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because your growth exposes their comfort. When you were living for their approval, everything felt fine. But now that you're living for God's voice above every other voice, some people can't walk with you the way they used to, and that can feel like rejection. It can feel like loss. It can make you wonder if you're doing something wrong. But Jesus warned us this would happen. In Matthew 10:34, he said, "Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword." The sword he spoke of wasn't violence, it was division. Not because he wants us divided, but because truth has a way of revealing who's really walking with him. When God calls you higher, not everyone in your life will have the courage to come with you. And that's not your fault. Some people were only assigned to your past season. Some were tied to the version of you that needed their valuing. But as you grow in faith, as your convictions deepen, and your purpose becomes clearer, you'll notice something. The room starts to empty. The circle gets smaller, but the voice of God gets louder. He starts replacing the applause of people with the affirmation of his presence. It's okay to grieve the friendships that don't make it into your next chapter. It's okay to feel the ache of separation, but don't let the pain make you question the path. Sometimes losing people is part of finding your purpose. Sometimes it's not rejection, it's redirection. And sometimes the only way to know you're truly walking with God is when you find yourself walking with fewer people than before. If your faith is growing but your circle is shrinking, that's not a sign of failure. It's a sign that God is pruning your life for what's ahead. Let him. Trust that the people he's removing are not meant to carry the weight of where he's taking you. You're not being abandoned. You're being prepared. Keep walking. Part 3. You're becoming unbothered by what used to control you. There was a time when the smallest offense would throw you off. A critical comment would ruin your whole day. Someone misunderstanding you would send you into overthinking and defensiveness. You were easily pulled into drama, eager to explain yourself, and quick to compare your journey to someone else's. But now something's shifting, and it's not because life suddenly got easier. You're just less moved by it all. The same temptations, distractions, and emotional triggers that once had a grip on you are starting to lose their power. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've started growing. You're beginning to crave peace more than attention. You're choosing silence over pointless debates. You're walking away from gossip instead of being pulled in. And even when people don't understand your boundaries or your quietness, you don't feel the need to explain yourself like you used to. At first, you might wonder if you're becoming numb or detached. But the truth is, you're maturing. What used to feel urgent now feels empty. What used to stir anxiety now only draws compassion. You're not reacting the same because you're not the same. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." That transformation isn't always loud. Sometimes it shows up in your calm, your restraint, your refusal to be pulled into battles that no longer deserve your energy. Spiritual maturity often shows up in what you no longer chase. You don't need to be in every conversation. You don't have to defend yourself at every turn. You don't need to prove your worth or keep up appearances. Why? Because you're anchored now. And when your identity is rooted in Christ, the noise of the world starts to fade into the background. This is what freedom looks like. It's not flashy or dramatic. It's quiet, steady, holy. When the world's hooks lose their reach, you're not growing cold, you're becoming more like Jesus. You're trading performance for presence, applause for alignment, hype for holiness. So if you found yourself more drawn to peace than performance, more interested in listening than proving, more commit to obedience than opinion. Don't second guess it. That's not apathy. That's transformation. That's the fruit of God working in you, not just around you. And it's one of the clearest signs that you're no longer on your own path. You're walking His. Keep going. Part 4. You're being stripped before you're built. You asked God to use you. You prayed for purpose, for growth, for breakthrough. You told Him you were ready to be who He created you to be. And then it felt like everything started falling apart. Not in little ways, but in deep, personal, painful ones. Things that once brought you comfort are being taken away. Plans that once felt certain are unraveling. Relationships are shifting. Old identities are breaking. And you're left standing in the middle of it all, wondering why it feels more like loss than calling. It's confusing, because we think that when God starts building us, it's supposed to look like elevation, more opportunities, more clarity, more visibility. But before God builds, He strips. Before He promotes, He prunes. He breaks before He multiplies. And if it feels like you're being emptied, it's not because you're being punished. It's because He's preparing to fill you with something greater than what you've been holding on to. John 15:2 says, "Every branch that bears fruit, He prunes, that it may bear more fruit." Notice, it's not the dead branches that get pruned. It's the fruitful ones. That means what you're going through isn't proof that something is wrong. It's evidence that something is growing. You're being refined, reshaped, realigned. God is removing what you can't carry into the next season, not to hurt you, but to heal you. There are things in your life right now, habits, attitudes, attachments, even certain dreams that may have served you in a past season but can't survive where God is taking you. And so He strips them away, not all at once, sometimes slowly, quietly, uncomfortably, but always with purpose, always with love. He knows the weight you're called to carry, and He knows what would crack under the pressure if He let you keep it. It's hard, because this part of the journey doesn't come with applause. It's lonely. It's quiet. It feels like nothing is happening. But in the kingdom of God, growth often happens in the dark. Just like a seed is buried before it blossoms, so are you. You're not being buried. You're being planted. And in time, what feels like loss will be revealed as the foundation of something unshakable. You will see why certain people couldn't stay, why certain doors had to close, why the old version of you had to die. Because what God is building through you requires depth, not just visibility. He's not just answering your prayers. He's shaping you to withstand the answer. So if you feel like you're being undone, stripped, emptied, don't run, don't retreat. Stand still. Stay surrendered. God is making room, not for what you thought you needed, but for what He knows you were created for. Keep trusting. Keep letting go. You're not being torn down. You're being prepared to rise. Part 5. You are hearing God in the silence. There was a time when you needed noise to feel close to God. You chased the loud moments, the worship highs, the powerful sermons, the confirmations from others. You waited for signs, for goosebumps, for someone else to speak what your heart longed to hear. But now, things are quieter. The emotions aren't always there. The music isn't always moving you. The voices around you aren't as loud. And for a moment it made you question whether God was still speaking. But here's the truth. He is. You're just learning to hear Him differently now. In the quiet, in the stillness, in the ordinary moments. Where you used to rely on outward experiences, now you're beginning to recognize His voice in your spirit. Not because He changed, but because you matured. You're no longer chasing feelings, you're seeking His presence. And when you slow down enough to listen, you find He never stopped speaking. 1 Kings 19:12. tells us that when the prophet Elijah looked for God, he wasn't in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. He was in a still, small voice. That's the same voice that speaks to you now. It's not always dramatic. It's not always loud. But it's real, it's steady, and it meets you in the secret place when no one else is watching. When nothing is performing for you, when it's just you and Him. This is one of the clearest signs that you're on God's path. When silence no longer feels like abandonment but invitation. When you no longer need a room full of people to feel seen, because you know He sees you. When you don't panic in the quiet, because you've learned that peace isn't found in noise, it's found in knowing. Knowing that even when He's silent, He's not absent. He's working in the waiting, speaking in the stillness. You're not becoming dry. You're becoming grounded. You're learning to walk by faith, not by sight. You're learning to trust what God said, even when He's not repeating Himself. And you're learning to measure His presence, not by emotional highs, but by the fruit that's growing in your life. Discernment, peace, conviction, clarity. When you're on your own path, you need constant affirmation to feel secure. But when you're on God's path, you begin to rest. Even when you don't understand, you begin to recognize that the silence isn't a void. It's space for intimacy. It's where God whispers what the world could never shout. That's where God whispers what the world could never shout. So if you found yourself craving quiet over noise, depth over hype, His voice over the opinions of others, don't second guess it. That's not distance. That's maturity. That's what it looks like when you stop needing the world's volume to feel God's presence. Keep listening. He's still speaking, and you're exactly where He wants you to be. Part 6. You care more about obedience than outcomes. There comes a shift in every believer's journey when the questions change. You stop asking God, "What can you give me?" and start asking God, "What do you want from me?" That shift is everything. It's where real surrender begins. Not because you've stopped hoping for good things, but because you've learned to trust that God's definition of good might not always look like yours. And suddenly, obedience becomes more important than the results. You used to tie your faith to outcomes. If the doors opened, God was with you. If the blessings came, He approved. If the prayer was answered, He heard you. But now, you're learning to obey even when the doors stay shut. You're tithing when the numbers don't make sense. You're forgiving when they never apologized. You're showing up even when no one sees it. Not because it feels good. Not because it's working the way you thought, but because you trust the one who told you to do it. That's what walking God's path looks like. It's letting go of control. It's releasing the need to predict, to measure, to guarantee outcomes. It's taking the next step without needing to see where it leads. John 14:15 says, "If you love me, keep my commandments," not keep my commandments when it benefits you. Just keep them, period. This is where faith is tested, not in what you say, but in what you do when obedience costs you something. When your obedience isn't met with applause. When it feels like you're planting seeds in dry ground. When the promise hasn't come, but you're still building the altar. That's where your heart is revealed, and that's where God meets you. On your own path, you look for shortcuts. You try to negotiate with God. I'll follow you, but only if things work out how I imagined. But on God's path, you obey and trust that His outcome will always be better than your plan. You learn to rest in uncertainty because you know who's writing the story. You begin to understand that obedience is the win, even when it doesn't feel like it yet. So if you're walking in faith right now, and you don't have the results to show for it, don't let that discourage you. God is not measuring your success by numbers, by applause, or by visible outcomes. He's looking at your heart, your consistency, your willingness to say yes when it would be easier to quit. That kind of obedience moves heaven. You're not being foolish. You're being faithful. And in the end, that faithfulness will lead you exactly where you were always meant to be. Keep saying yes, even when it costs you. Especially when it costs you. Because when you're more focused on obedience than outcomes, it's one of the clearest signs you're no longer following your own path. You're following His. Part 7. You're starting to look like Jesus, not the world. This is the sign that everything you've walked through, every trial, every loss, every quiet, surrendered yes, is doing the work God intended. You may not see it at first. You might still feel like you're stumbling more than standing. But little by little, the reflection in the mirror is changing. Your thoughts are shifting. Your words sound different. Your responses don't come from impulse, but from peace. The way you carry pain, handle offense, manage pressure. It's not what it used to be. You're not trying to be more spiritual. You're just becoming more like Jesus. And that's the point of the path. That's what all of this has been about. God's path is not about status or platform or everything working out exactly the way you imagined. It's about being conformed to the image of His Son. 2 Corinthians 3:18 says we are being transformed into His image with ever-increasing glory. That's not poetic language. It's the reality of walking with God. When you're on His path, the proof isn't in your possessions or your position. It's in your posture, the posture of your heart, your humility, your love, your willingness to serve, to forgive, to show grace when the world expects you to retaliate. And the most beautiful part, you're not even trying to impress anyone anymore. You're not performing for approval. You're not working for love. You're living from it. The need to be seen has faded because you've found peace in being known by Him. You've traded striving for stillness, anxiety for trust, control for surrender. And somehow, in the process of chasing God's heart, you've started to reflect it. This transformation doesn't come through striving. It comes through staying in His Word, staying in His presence, staying on the path, even when it hurts. And now, without even realizing it, you're bearing fruit. Not just activity, but evidence. The fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. You're not forcing it. It's flowing from a life that's being pruned, purified, and poured out. You might not feel qualified. You might still see your flaws more than your progress. But the fact that you're changing, that you're becoming more tender, more truthful, more grounded in grace, is the clearest sign you're not on your own path anymore. You're walking His, and in walking it, you're not just getting somewhere. You're becoming someone, the person He always intended you to be. Keep walking. You're becoming like Him. Conclusion. You're not lost. You're being led. You've probably noticed by now, God's path doesn't always come with a signpost. It rarely feels easy, and it often looks nothing like what you expected. But that doesn't mean you're lost. In fact, the very things that have made you question whether you're going the wrong way might be the strongest evidence that you're finally walking the right one. Yes, it's harder. Yes, it's quieter. Yes, it can feel lonely, uncomfortable, even painful. But it's also where real transformation happens. It's where chains break, where old versions of you fall away, and where God starts building something lasting in your soul. It's where you stop living for applause and start living for purpose. Where you stop asking for easy and start asking for more of Him. If you're facing resistance, if you're losing people, if you feel like everything is being stripped away, don't panic. Don't turn back. Don't confuse discomfort with disobedience. You're not being punished. You're being prepared. And every moment of pain has purpose when God is the one guiding your steps. You were never meant to walk this path by sight. You were meant to walk it by faith. And faith doesn't always feel good, but it always leads to what's good, because it leads you closer to the one who is good. This isn't just about arriving at a destination. It's about becoming the kind of person who reflects the heart of Jesus no matter what the path looks like. So keep going, keep trusting, keep showing up. You're not on your own path anymore. You're on His, and that changes everything.